This is a small section from a mimer from the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, Shalom Dov Ber, Schneerson. And the idea here is to define what are the Mochin, the Chabad, the Chochmah, Binah, and DAAT. In order to understand first what the Mochin are, that we see that when a person is involved in some subject, like let's say business, first he starts to think about it, and he meditates how this thing is good and kosher for him, and he has to have a desire for this idea. That first a thought comes into his head like a spark, like a bolt of lightning, a general bolt of lightning. It's like when you get an idea, it comes into your head. It's still very much in a nebulous stage. It's like a spark. It hasn't solidified yet. And then one thinks about this idea in more details, how this idea is good for him, and he has to want this idea. First, the havraka, which means like the spark or the flash in his mind, it's a general idea which comes from the moch of Chochmah, the brain of Chochmah. And after that, it goes into hasaga, which is understanding, and the details, which is the moch of Binah, the brain of Binah. And nevertheless, after this, it's still not decided that he's made a decision, and he hasn't, still it's not solidified yet. Even though that he's thought about it in his mind, and he's understood it very well, it's still not, it does not necessarily follow that he will have a decision on this. And sometimes he could think about this and he could come up with another conclusion which is totally opposite of what he thought in the first place. But specifically through the brain of DAAT, which is when he fixates his mind strongly on the concept, this way the idea, the concept, will be incorporated inside of himself, in his inner self. You see here you have a diagram which shows you on one side you have the Chochmah on the top here, and then on the other side you have the Binah, and in the middle there's the DAAT. See, these are the spheres, but they're going in a three-column. Sometimes they're represented in going straight down to one column, but this time it's three columns. Anyways, you get the idea. The DAAT is the idea of when you've reached the level of feeling, of Hargasha, of kind of a realization, with all the depth of the reason of why he wants to do this idea, why he wants to carry this out. And then the decision in his soul is made in such a way and not in another way. He decided to do it this specific way. So it comes out from this that the true decision, which is related to the action that he's going to take, is specifically done through the brain of DAAT. And just from hasaga and Binah and understanding alone, he has not reached any conclusion yet, and it's not felt inside of him internally. It's only the seichel. Just the seichel alone is not enough. But through DAAT, he comes through a firm decision, and it's felt internally the reason why he's doing this, and that's why it comes out in that particular conclusion. So we see the difference between Chochmah, which is basically a spark, and Binah, which is breaking it down into. This is a continuation of the previous video. I'm adding this on. What it has to do with Chochmah, Binah, and DAAT. You have the diagram here. You can see all the sfirot. They're all placed in columns. You can see on one side here you have Chochmah, the other side you have Binah, and in the middle you have DAAT. So, as I said before, that Chochmah is a more general thing. It's like when you get an idea in your head, it's just a flash and you haven't really grasped it yet. It's beyond grasp yet until it gets to the idea of Binah, which is called Hasaga, an understanding. It's also known that there's something called Chochmah and Binah, Chochmah, which means that there's an element of Chochmah in Binah and an element of Binah in Chochmah that would allow that Chochmah should be prepared to go to the next level, to be in understanding, which it's called, when it goes in Binah, there's a level of Chochmah which allows Binah to have a certain amount of, let's say, nullification or kind of that spark of wisdom, that it shouldn't go off on a tangent and to come to the wrong conclusion. So it's called Chochmah and Binah. So there's an inclusion factor within each one of them, which allows them to be stabilized to relate to each other. So as previously stated, that DAAT is the actual Hachlata, the deciding factor, because if you don't have DAAT, the Chochmah and the Binah are basically meaningless. So they will not come to any conclusion. So there's something called Pnimiyat Binah, which means the inner part of Binah, which is sort of relates to Chochmah. It's the kind of the conclusion. It's called Tanzit of Binah. Let's say, I would say the synopsis of the Binah and the Chochmah. That is also related to DAAT. The DAAT is something, as you can see, it's right in the middle. It's in the middle part. The idea of the middle, it's very important because it's sort of in a way, the middle is a reconciliation of the right and the left. Let's say that Tiferet is a reconciliation of the Chesed on one side and the Gvura on one side. So similarly here, we have a kind of harmonization and synthesis between the Binah and the Chochmah, which allows you to have a Hargasha, which means a feeling that is a kind of realization which will lead to the action.